You're listening to Change Your POV Podcast, episode 54.
Anywhere from $500 to $1,000, if you can have that set aside at all times, then when those emergencies happen, you can take that money and say, hey, it's in my savings account, but I need it. You don't need it for Taco Bell, you don't need it for a new set of rims, but you might need it if you have a flat tire or you need these car repairs. And then once you pay for whatever you do from your emergency fund, then you start building that back up again.
Welcome to Change Your POV Podcast, helping you navigate transitions in your life like entering and exiting college or the military, changing jobs or careers, and providing you with the coaching and mentorship needed to help you advance in your personal or professional life. Sometimes all you need is to change your point of view. Now, here's your host, Eddie Lazary.
I am your host, Eddie Lazary, and I am here with Ryan Gana. Now, I was actually searching around the internet, putting together some information for one of my previous episodes relating to currently serving military and education. And you can check that out at changeyourpov.com/episode 41. And while I was doing that research, I stumbled across a website called the Military Wallet, and I found Ryan Gana as the founder of that, as well as cashmoneylife.com, and I got in contact with him and said, hey, I really dig what you've got going on. I like the information that you have that you're providing to the veteran community and those that are still serving, and would you be willing to come on to Change Your POV podcast and kind of share your story? And he agreed. So welcome, Ryan. How you doing?
Doing great, Eddie. Thanks for the kind words and kind introduction, and thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. So you we talked for a little bit, and we kind of got into your story, and I really like your background and kind of how you got started. So let's kind of go back a little bit and talk to us about your military service, why you joined, how long you served, and what you were doing when you were in.
Sure. So I joined back in '99. I graduated high school in '98. Did a year of college, and school had always been something I just did, right? It was expected, and I knew I would go to college and get my degree, and I did that for a year, and I just realized I wasn't really challenged. I didn't have a whole lot of direction in terms of what I wanted to do, so I didn't see the point in getting a degree without an end goal in mind. A lot of people go into college, they know they're going to be that doctor or lawyer or criminal justice or whatever career field they know. I didn't have a clue. So after a year, I decided I wanted to have an adventure. So I did. I talked to my dad about it, and he said, take a summer off, take a gap year is kind of what they do in Europe. They take a year off, or they take a summer, or they do something and they go have that adventure. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that 6 months or a year wasn't going to be enough. So I ended up joined the Air Force. I signed for 6 years. The reason I went for 6 instead of 4 is my older brother's just retired from the Marines. Actually, he signed for 4, and at the end of his 4, he didn't know what he wanted to do. So he re-enlisted just because he wasn't ready to figure that out. So I figured 6 years would be enough time for me to make up my mind. And in retrospect, that was one of the better decisions I made. So I did. I shipped off to basic, and my job I was an aircraft mechanic, electrical environmental. So did that. I worked on F-15s and C-130s. My first duty assignment was at RAF Lakenheath in the UK, and that's where my signing for 6 came back and helped me, because the only people in my tech school classes who went overseas were those guys who signed for 6 years. Everybody who signed for 4 remained stateside. So that ended up working out really well for me.
That's awesome. Was that your first choice? I don't know how Air Force works. I mean, do you get to pick what you get to do, or how does that work?
Well, career-wise, I made the mistake of just going into an open career field. So I went in open electronics, and the reason I did that, I think my overall ASVAB score was like 97 or 98. It was ridiculously high, so I qualified for almost anything. Um, but when I went actually processed at MEPS, I did it in the summertime, and a lot of the high school graduates had already gone through, and there weren't many choice job offerings at the time, at least not that I was interested in. And then I realized that, you know what, I'm either going to do this or I'm not. So I'm not going to get too choosy. So I just chose the open electronics, and that's the job they gave me. Not what I would have chosen, but it ended up being a great experience. I met tons of great people, got to travel the world. And then as far as the assignment goes, we fill out our dream sheet. So you pick your top 10 stateside, top 10 overseas. And I think RAF Lakenheath, it's about an hour and 15 minutes northeast of London. That was in my top three. So I got super lucky there.
That's awesome. Now, I don't know if you're too familiar with Change Your POV, but one of the things that we talk about here on the show quite a bit is the struggles of what some call transition. I've been trying to stay away from the word transition because in my mind, a transition is going from, from a solid state to a liquid state, or from from a position of nothing to a position of something. And to transition out of the military is to almost imply that you're going from being, military to non-military or civilian. And I don't agree. If you wear the uniform, I don't care if you do 4 years, 6 years, 10, 12, 20 years, you wear that uniform and you've got the American flag patch on your shoulder, you'll never be a civilian ever again. I mean, that's why the term veteran is in existence. So as you found yourself evolving out of the military into civilian life, not as a civilian, but into the civilian sector, how much runway did you give yourself? Or did you think about transition or evolving out of the military? How did you do that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. That's a great way to put it. So I'm going to answer this. I'm going to actually step back first because I'm used to using the word transition. So if I use that, just give me a virtual slap in the head. My evolution, if you will, or my planning for separating from the military really started way before I actually made the decision to get out. So I mentioned I had a year of college when I joined, and my whole goal, part of the reason I did 6 years, was because I knew they had tuition assistance, and one of my goals was to actually complete my degree while I was on active duty so that I still had the GI Bill to use for a master's degree program, and it would give me options to either become an officer while I was enlisted or get out and then hit the ground running for my civilian career. So that's what I did. My story for that is it's worth mentioning because I worked on the flight line. Our typical day was probably average about 9 hours, 10 hours when I was working on fighter aircraft. It was about 9 hours when I was working on heavies, the C-130s. So the only way I could do that was I had a year of college. I was able to get some college credits from my military service. The Air Force, when you go to technical school, they have the Community College of the Air Force. So we got some credits there. And let's see, the rest of it, I took classes in residence and online while I was deployed. And I tested out a whole bunch of classes through CLEP Test, Dante's, Excelsior, and the like. So by the time I sat down and started to get my degree, it took me, I want to say, about 18 months. I already had a year of college before, but then it took me about 18 months to finish everything else, and that includes all the testing out of classes and taking everything else. So my goal was to give myself options. So when it came time at my 6-year mark, I realized that I had been deployed so much, I had done so many things, I had accomplished so much, but I hadn't had enough time for myself. So I wanted to make that transition, or that evolution, if you will. So that's when I made the decision to get out of the military. So that degree gave me more options, I feel, for employment. I didn't feel like I had to go get something part-time right away, and I didn't feel like I had to go back to school. So the other thing was I did 5 deployments in my 6 years, so I was able to bank a little bit of cash. I was single, no dependents, so I had enough cash set aside that I could take my time to find the right job. That said, it took 6 months to find something, and it was difficult. That was probably one of the most difficult times as an adult that I went through, because when you're in the military and you know how it is, you're leading troops or you're leading a shift, and then you hit that wall, you leave, and you're no longer doing any of that. You're not responsible for anything other than yourself. You're no longer part of that unit, part of that mission. So for me, that was very difficult to, be going 100 miles an hour and then the next week, nothing. So I struggle with that, but in terms of having the runway, yeah, I absolutely had a lot of money saved, and I had a good enough plan. Everything worked out in the end.
And folks, those of you listening out there that are still serving, I use the same excuse, and I hear people use it still to this day about getting education while they're in, and that is, the op tempo is too fast, too many deployments. There's not enough time, costs too much. Like all of these excuses that people use to get a higher education while they're actively serving in the military. I think you proved it, Ryan, that if you want something bad enough, you can figure out a way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was not easy. I worked mid shift um, for a couple years so I could take those classes. I would get off work at 8 in the morning, go home, go to sleep, wake up in the afternoon. I'd go to class for a few hours, then I would change in my uniform and go to work, and then I worked through the night. So I gave up obviously nights, weekends. I gave up a lot of sleep while I was deployed. I did online classes, but yeah, I mean, if you want it, you have to make your priority. And a lot of
Hmm.
people, they have other situations. I was single. I didn't have the family, so that made it a little easy. And my supervision was good enough to allow me to work the midnight shift. They were probably glad I was volunteering, actually, so they didn't have to do it. But it's you do have to work with your supervision, and you've got to figure out a way to do it. But if you want it bad enough, you probably can.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about what. So 6 months after you get out, you finally find the job. What was the job that you ended up landing? Was it something you wanted or something you fell into?
Yeah, a little bit of both. I didn't know exactly what I wanted. I knew that uh, prior to when I was in the military, I was a blue collar worker turning wrenches, and that was fine. But that also meant working out in the cold and the rain and the snow, the heat. When I was deployed, it got up to 135, 140 degrees. Uh, when the coldest I worked was probably -20, not counting wind chill, when I was in Alaska on a temporary duty assignment. So those are huge swings, and I didn't want to do that forever. So my goal was to get more into something where I could use more of my brains instead of my brawn. And I was able to find a job at headquarters, AFMC, Air Force Materiel Command, at Wright-Patterson, doing logistics analysis. So basically, that's the Air Force logistics headquarters, and I was able to do logistics analysis on the supply chain for actually the C-130 that I used to work on and several other platforms. So I didn't know exactly how to do all of it, but I knew the language. I knew a lot of the codes for the parts and the supplies. So they were able to plug me in there, and before long, I knew exactly what was going on and how to do all kinds of crazy data mining and things that I don't have a clue, don't know, wouldn't have had a clue how to do while I was in the military. But just having that background and being able to speak the language and understand what they're asking, then it gave me a different perspective. So it was a good job. It worked out.
Mm. Now, was that through the government or was that an NGO?
So it was I was NGO's non-government organization.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I was a contractor. So yeah, NGO, I suppose. So, but I worked hand in hand with the civil service members. I worked for, there was a major that I reported directly to. So in a way, it was the perfect evolution, if you will, for my career, because I was still around the military environment. And what you mentioned, if anybody who's served, whether it was 4 years, 6 years, 20 years, whatever it might be, you've got that military mentality. It will always be a part of your life. So for me, that was actually a great thing, because I was still around the environment. I was still around people in uniform. I was still part of the mission, speaking the same language. So yeah, for me, that was probably the best situation I could have landed. It worked out great.
Yeah. And I've found that the folks that I speak with, the veterans that I talk to, that have that, for the lack of a better term, that buffer zone or that buffer period where they're no longer wearing the uniform, but they're still in and around or associating with, either governmental type jobs, contracting jobs, and the like. They tend to find that path um, a little bit easier to navigate. What would you say to those that get out and they go either, back home to their home of record, or they go somewhere and they're, the closest military base, installation, company job, or whatever is 100 miles away. They're in the middle of nothing. They're in civilianville, essentially. What would you recommend to those folks um, to help bridge that gap?
That's a great question. So that's where I was about 4 years later. I worked for two different companies working on very similar projects and working in and around the military on those projects. Then I started my websites and I became a full time entrepreneur. So I ended up leaving those jobs. And after about a year of that, my wife and I moved to rural Illinois, about 45 miles west of Chicago. But there's nothing close to us, no Air Force. We were completely separated from the military community at that time. And I struggled with that, to be honest. The military has always been part of me ever since I served. And, even though I ran the military wallet, I still didn't feel as connected. I almost felt like who am I to keep, writing for military members and veterans when I'm no longer around it, So I felt very disconnected and I struggled with that. So it took me a little while, but I ended up joining the Air National Guard. It's not going to be for everybody, obviously, but I would actually encourage people to look into the Guard or the Reserves, either one, because both of them can help tremendously with the transition. There's a ton of benefits. There's some pay that's involved. You can continue working toward a retirement. But more importantly, and I wish I would have done this, earlier on, you get to continue to be part of the mission and be around people who are like-minded. They understand what you're going through. They speak the same language, and there's tremendous value to having that when you're making the evolution, if you will, out of the military and into the civilian world. And on top of that, your professional network is going to explode. You're going to meet a lot more people and potentially even find either full-time employment or part-time, or meet somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, and you can find work that way. So I'm not going to tell anybody they have to go out and join, but I would recommend at least look into the option, because there's a lot, when you're on active duty, there's a lot of misunderstanding about what the Guard and Reserves do, and I think for many people it's actually worth looking into.
Yeah, totally agree. And it's funny because it's probably the same for you, I would imagine. But I remember being in, I got out in 2005, and I just remember being in and just listened to everybody bitch and cry and complain about how the military sucks and they can't wait till they get out, and they'll be a free man or free woman, get to do what they want, don't have to answer to anybody, on and on and on. And I'll be honest, full transparency, I was in that camp a few times, and then you get out and you realize, wait a minute, the grass isn't really exactly greener on the other side. And a lot of folks, it doesn't take long for them to be out before they're right back in the recruiter's office trying to figure out how to get back in.
Yeah, I've seen that a little bit. I got out at the same time. I got out in early '06, so we probably had some similar experiences. Yeah, that's the absolute truth. The grass is not always greener. The problem, though, is when you do get out, getting back in, especially on active duty, can be tremendously difficult, especially right now while the military is downsizing. They're letting a lot of people go for, many reasons. Some people, there is no reason other than we don't need your career field anymore. Sorry. We're letting you go. So if you have any inkling about staying whatsoever, stay on active duty if you can. If you think that's where you need to be, and if not, look into the Guard or Reserves. If you do get out of active duty and you decide, hey, I miss it, then absolutely look into the Guard or Reserves. You don't have to stay the same branch. You can go from Army to Air Force or really any service. You may have to go do some additional training and things like that, but your recruiter will help you figure out which jobs are available, your rank, all those things. Look into it. I think there's a lot of value in continuing service. And, I had an 8.5 year break in service. That's a long time to be out, but every time I go to drill, I've got a big cheesy grin on my face. I just love it. I love putting the uniform on. I love serving again. I love being in the environment. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Love it, man. So you mentioned you are an entrepreneur, a full-time blogger since 2010. How did you get into that?
Yeah, so it was the evolution into the civilian sector. I didn't have a clue what I was doing. You know, I had done, read a few books here and there, and I just kind of jumped into the civilian world and realized there's this whole system that I don't have a clue about. Things like mortgages and health insurance and life insurance, investing in 401ks. I had just gotten married, and I didn't know anything, so to speak, and there I am. I need to be the head of my household. I need to be a leader. I need to take care of my wife. I needed to set myself up for the future. So I just started reading everything I could, and I started the website cashmoneylife.com just to kind of document what I was learning. And I was writing some articles about the military transition, or getting out and going into the civilian world, and I realized it needed to be two separate sites. So I ended up splitting them into two sites, and eventually I started making money with it, and got to the point where I was making roughly the same as my day job. And we had our first baby, and she had colic, and she did not sleep. My wife had become a stay-at-home mom at that point, and I just wasn't sleeping. So something had to go. It was either the day job or the website. So we talked about it and prayed about it, and decided to give entrepreneurship a try. And it's been 6 years in February. So it's been an amazing blessing.
That's awesome. Yeah, so I'm also in this space, in the website space, blogging, podcasting, that whole bit. What do you do, or what did you do when you first started out to monetize?
Yeah, great question. I put AdSense on there, which is kind of what everybody does. And I tried a few little affiliate ads. And for those who are listening, affiliate ad is where you get a referral credit if somebody signs up or purchases a product service through your website. So I did a little bit of that. It took me 7 months to get my first check from AdSense. So AdSense will send you a check when you receive $100 in earnings. So it took me 7 months to earn that. So definitely not a get-rich-quick scheme. But after that, I was earning at least $100 every month consistently. And I want to say it took, like I said, 7 months. And then by December, I started in March. By December, I sold some text links, which you don't do that anymore. But this was back in 2007 when it was kind of frowned upon, but not a completely no. So I probably made $1,000 off that. But then that first year things really started taking off, mostly through affiliate referrals, some banner ads. I started doing some freelance writing. I've written for a lot of different publications. So it's kind of a mixture, and now I do a combination of pay-per-click ads, referral ads, the affiliates, banner ads, some private advertising, newsletters, freelance writing. I do some consulting. It's kind of a mixed bag.
Yeah, you almost kind of have to have a little mixed bag to diversify a little bit, especially because the technology and the web changes constantly, and you don't know, what's going to be viable one day versus the next.
Yeah, so I'm going on 9 years of blogging now, and the web has changed. It's evolved so tremendously. Cell phone, smartphones and tablets weren't around. So much has changed. It's completely different. So it's been a constant evolution. But you know what? Anybody who served in the military knows how to roll with it, right? That's just what you do. You adapt. You have to. So anybody who's listening, whether they're in the military, whether they've already transitioned, they're thinking about joining, any phase of life, you're going to have to adapt. And those who don't are the ones who are going to be complaining 20 years later, saying, well, back in my day. And yeah, quite frankly, I don't want to be that guy, So yeah, you have to diversify. You have to have your fingers in different cookie jars, and you have to adapt.
So let's talk about cashmoneylife.com. What's the premise for that site? What's the kind of the mission statement?
Yeah, great question. I'm actually going through and kind of revamping it. That site started off as me learning just about financial topics and sharing what I learned, and then I got to the point where I felt like I ran out of things to say. So I kind of I hired a bunch of different writers to help lighten the load, and because I felt like I didn't have a whole lot left to say on the topic of money. But now I've kind of let it go dormant for a little bit. The site's not dormant completely. I still get a lot of traffic. I just haven't been updating frequently. And one of the things that I've been looking at is, which direction do I really want to take it? And what's interesting the most to me right now is financial independence and early retirement. Not early as in I'm going to retire at age 40. I'm 36 now. But, when can I retire? What will it take? Those kinds of things. So I guess the next stage for me is really simplifying my mission and my message, and that's going to be financial independence and financial freedom. So that's where I'm going. I've kind of designed a few things, and I've got some drafts of articles. I'm going to start getting those out here in the near future. I'm going to totally redesign it as well. I've got the a new logo waiting in the wings, so I just got to get a designer to build the website theme back out for me.
Nice. That's cool. And the military wallet.com. Talk to us about that. Those that are, is that primarily for currently serving veterans, anybody?
Yeah, it's for everybody. I don't have a whole lot in there for. Uh, so let's break down who is in the military community, right? You have those who are thinking about joining. You got those who are currently serving on active duty. You've got Guard and Reserve members. You've got retirees. Then you've got the people who, such as like your. Did you retire? Are you retired or what is your? Did you
No, I did 10 years. I
10
didn't even
years?
get to keep a card. My ID card's gone. Everything's
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah, so there are people such as yourself and how I was before I joined the Guard, people who served but didn't retire. So you're a veteran, but you're no longer currently affiliated with a group, and then you also have like military spouses. So really there's a whole bunch of disparate people who fall into the military and veteran community. So I try to create content that's going to apply to everybody at some point. It's a lot to handle. I'm pretty much I'm going to say I'm the bottleneck right now because I'm the one slowing everything up. I have a couple freelance writers who write for me every once in a while, and then I create the majority of the content. But it's tough to reach all those different groups. So one of the things that I'm looking at doing is hiring some help. The thing that I need most is probably an editor to help me come up with an editorial schedule and help me actually get the content out. I can write stuff, but then getting back and editing it is kind of a pain for me, and then managing different writers. So I feel that I can really step the game up for the site if I can hire somebody to help me do that, and then bring in a couple more writers. And then we can really start getting a lot more content out to reach all of these different groups instead of, once every other month. We can get something to each of these groups every month, or hopefully to the point where, we're hitting, 5 articles a week instead of, one or two.
Yeah. And where's your draw for your content? Is it research? Is it speaking with others in different fields? Like, where do you come up with it?
Yeah, great question. So I get a ton of email and reader questions and comments on the site. So I like to use those. I find that if I'm getting the same question over and over again, I need to write an article out on that. The first reason is a lot of people need that information. The second is I try to answer as many emails as I can, and it's so much easier if I can just drop a link in the email and say, here's the answer, instead of writing the same thing out every time. I also have a lot of friends who are currently serving, whether it's active or in the Guard or Reserves. I have several retiree friends and a network of other military bloggers. So we kind of communicate, and if there are topics that kind of pique my interest, I'll go out there and do that. Personal experiences: when I joined the Guard, I had to actually get a medical waiver to do that, and that was a big pain. I'll tell you, there was no written process on the web that I could find. There is now, and there's a podcast, and I did it. And I've received a lot of people thanking me for putting that information out there because it just wasn't available. So if I go out there and I find something, I will try to make a tutorial because I know if I had to do it, there's probably somebody else who had to do it as well. And there's not a lot of documentation for this stuff out there. So if I can get out there and I can help some people, then yeah, I'm going to do my best to do that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's really the whole reason why I started, Change Your POV podcast and blog for that very reasons, because, 12 years since I've been out of the military now, and I had to, I looked for resources to help me through things that I was struggling with and I got out, and I couldn't find anything anywhere. And I finally got to the point where after 12 years going through, my life experiences, kicking, screaming, biting, clawing, whatever I had to do, and I finally came up with the answers that I was looking for 12 years ago. I said, you know what? I felt that I had an obligation to share that experience and the lessons that I learned with those that are, just now reaching that point in their life. Because I'm just trying to do for others what I wish somebody had done for me, so to speak. And that's why I'm doing it, and that's why a lot of the veterans that I surround myself with also look for ways to provide as much value to the currently serving and the post-military folks as much as possible. So I wanted to say, thanks to you, Ryan, for you could have just figured it out on your own and just lived your life dumb and happy, and been, and that would have been it. But you decided to take it one step further and actually document it and extend it out to those that may be in need. So that leads me to the next point, and that is, um, after talking with so many people for so many years, what is kind of the reoccurring themes or reoccurring questions that you seem to get on a routine basis?
Yeah, great question. So really, that's a tough one to answer with a single answer because, as I mentioned, there's a whole bunch of different groups, right? So the most important question is whatever's relevant to them at that time. So people who are joining, it's how do I get in, or how do I get a guaranteed job, those kinds of things. If it's I'm already in, it's hey, I'm getting separated and I don't know what to do next, or how do I get my college degree, or people who have retired. The big one I get is disability pay and retirement pay, how those two work together. It's complicated. So there's no real one size fits all question. It really depends on which class of a military community. Active, guard, reserve, retiree, served but didn't retire, military spouses. So there are some themes that run through each of those groups.
What kind of feedback do you get? I know you say you put up blog posts and you get emails and such. Do you have other community type outlets like Facebook groups or any other thing like that for members of your community to kind of converse with one another?
No, I don't, but that's next on the agenda for me. I've got a Facebook page, but Facebook has changed so much with their algorithms in the last probably 2-3 years, and they make it very difficult to get a lot of traction on your page unless you're paying for it. So they kind of went for a pay to play mentality, which works for them. They've got to work toward the bottom line. So I think the next thing is probably a group, and part of the reason for that is because I get inundated at times with questions, and it's probably anywhere from 10 to 15 questions a day via email and comments and things like that, and I can't scale myself, unfortunately. So I think what I'm probably going to have to do at some point is on some of the more complicated questions that require a lot of research, I will probably have to close those comments down, but redirect them to a Facebook group and say, hey, I just can't answer all these, but we have this great community of people who would love to help you. Come join us. And I think that's probably what I'm going to have to do. So a Facebook group, I think, is going to be next on my agenda. Get that going, try to get the discussion going over there, and hopefully generate some more ideas for content. Hopefully find some people who are experts and possibly willing to come on as writers, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a great idea. A lot of folks that I know in my network that are in a similar space as us, they've done just that. They've created some groups within Facebook, because you're right, you can only scale yourself to a certain point, and you kind of hit that ceiling. And they were inundated with questions and inquiries and all, and in some cases I'm not going to say they were, little questions or light questions or easy questions. I mean, if somebody has a question, it's big to them, right? But getting that into a community, where you've got other people that have either been through that, gone through that, or even received that advice from you earlier on, can then kind of pay it forward and extend their hand and help those out. So you get kind of this reciprocal type of camaraderie that happens within a community, and it kind of helps ease some bandwidth for you. So yeah, that's excellent idea. I highly recommend it, and I look forward to joining that and being a part of that when it becomes available. That's awesome.
I'll be sure to send you a link. And yeah, that's the goal. I have several friends who have some pretty active Facebook groups. So part of it is I see how well they're doing, and I'm like, man, I just don't want to do all that work setting it up and putting all these posts in there. But part of it is once the community reaches its gets that momentum going, it kind of becomes self-sustaining. So I think I just need to bite the bullet and get it started and build something there.
I want to talk briefly about finances. Now, when I was in the military, and a lot of guys that I know that are in, very little of us knew much, if anything, about personal finances. I mean, it's embarrassing now, but I'll be honest. I got out of the military and had no idea what a 401k was. I mean, those just aren't topics that are brought. I don't know about the Air Force, but in the Army, it's not like we sat around, you know, at the smoke break area talking about, trading options and investing and in savings. We were talking about, well, exactly what we were talking about. So, what kind of message, or what can we say to those that are listening now that perhaps are still in, that perhaps maybe haven't thought about personal finances up to this point? Should they be thinking about it? And if so, what should they be thinking about in terms of a starting point?
That's a great question, and I'll tell you, the Air Force is just like the Army in that regard. I did know a few people who were pretty financially savvy, and I guarantee you there are a few people in the Army who are financially savvy. The thing is you're not going to know unless you either overhear them talking about it or you bring it up in the first place, and then you see that little spark behind somebody's eyes. I was one of those nerds who just read about stuff. I read. I can't even tell you how much I read. We're in April already, and I put 20 books down this year already. I read a lot, and that's not counting articles online and things like that. So the big thing though is first to be aware of your finances. A lot of people they think in terms of how much can I afford in terms of a payment, right? It's a terrible mentality because it's easy to think, oh, $300 or $500. That's not a big deal until you start adding those up and all the other payments that you have. So that's one of the first things I'd look at. But really it all boils down to one thing. You have to spend less than you earn. That's as basic as it gets, and I know that's a duh moment, but you'd be surprised at how many people don't really implement that concept. If you can spend less than you earn or earn more than you spend, then you will be more successful in life. Now, obviously, you want to put as big a gap in between those two as you can, and then you want to save and invest that. But the most important thing is to get current and then to just not carry debt. If you can do that, then you'll be successful. And as far as where you should start, service members should start with the thrift savings plan. Put as much as you can afford to in there. 1% if that's all you can do, 5% is better, 10% is great. If you do that, you'll be light years ahead of most of your peers.
Mm. And so I'm gonna share with you a story that's probably gonna make you throw up in your mouth. But I'm sure the Air Force has these as well. But pretty much anywhere you go where there's a military installation, a base, a post, whatever, outside, probably within a couple blocks of being off post, There's
Payday
going to be,
loans.
there you go, the check for a check, baby. Woohoo! I ain't gonna lie, I ate my ass on that for, I had no idea. I had no idea. It was such a vicious cycle. And once you get deep into it, man, you just can't get out. And anyone that's listening that's in the military, I don't care what branch you're in, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You go in there, check for a check. They do the you buy quote unquote calling cards. That was the big thing when I was in, right? You buy these, you know, prepaid calling cards or something like it. It's just a terrible, terrible, terrible a way to go and get a loan. The interest rates are absolutely through the roof. What I mean, I'm sure you've obviously heard of it. I don't know if you've experienced it personally, but what would you say to those that have either done that or thinking about doing that?
Yeah, so let's start with those who are thinking about it. The best thing I can say is absolutely do not do it. 100% do not do it. So if you are in a cash crunch and you absolutely need cash, go to the service, whatever military aid foundation is on your base, right? So we had the Air Force Aid, I think is what it was called. I know there's one for each branch of the service. Talk to your first sergeant. Talk to your supervisor. Hey, can you float me $100? Can you float me $200? I'll pay it back, and you better if it's your supervisor. But find some way to get the money, and then look for ways to cut your expenses. If you got to sell your car, do it. If you got to sell that shiny guitar that you got when you came back, I'm a guitar player, so that's what comes to mind. Sell your stereo system, whatever. Don't get into hock for a payday loan because it will absolutely destroy you. Find ways to do it. Change your habits. If you've already done it, if it's in the past, you've paid it off and you've learned from it, then be that mentor and be that supervisor for somebody else and don't let them make the mistake you did. If you're in the middle of that right now, then everything else that I just said applies. Talk to your first sergeant, talk to an aid foundation, talk to your supervisor, somebody. Get some help. Most bases will have some kind of financial planning assistance or counselor on base. These guys are nonprofit. You don't have to pay them. They're going to keep it anonymous unless you're doing something illegal. Don't do that. But they can help you create a plan to get out of this debt. The most important thing you can do is take charge. Do not be a victim because, hey, guess what? We're in the military, folks. You are not, don't be a victim. Take charge and be responsible with your money.
That's awesome advice. The other thing that I found myself getting stuck in is I went to the bank and I got a $500 overdraft limit, meaning that I can dip below my available balance, $500 below zero, basically. And which was nice, I guess. It was nice, to cover checks or whatever that was unexpected, especially if you're out in the field and you're not on tap with everything that's going on financially. But it became a problem to the point where every time I got a paycheck, all it did was pay back my overdraft fee to basically zero balance, which meant I had to go back into my overdraft and use it to pay bills. And of course, the interest rates on the money that I was basically taking out of my overdraft was higher. So again, that's another vicious loop, a vicious cycle. I would not recommend getting anything greater than maybe $100 overdraft protection. What's your recommendation there?
Yeah, so again, remember what I said a few moments ago. The most important thing you can do is live within your means, and once you get into that vicious cycle, it's incredibly hard to get out of. And you have to start looking at ways that you can change what's happening, right? If you go over overdraft once, yeah, you make a mistake. That's what it's for. But if you're consistently living there, or if you're consistently visiting the pawn shops or payday loans, then there's a systemic problem, and something needs to change. So the most important thing is to sit down and look at everything. Write down all of your expenses on a piece of paper. Here's my car insurance, my car note, my cell phone bill, my internet, whatever expenses you may have. look at those and write them down and find out what you can cut. If you have to sell the car that you're making payments on and then go drive a beater, then do that, because you might just free up $400 a month, $500 a month. And yeah, you got that beater, you don't have that shiny new ride, but guess what? You're not bouncing checks, you're not paying these payday loans hundreds of dollars, and you can start getting ahead. The other important thing I do is once you get even, you need to create a buffer. So what most people do is they call that an emergency fund or a rainy day fund. Anywhere from $500 to $1,000. If you can have that set aside at all times, then when those emergencies happen, you can take that money and say, hey, it's in my savings account, but I need it. You don't need it for Taco Bell, you don't need it for a new set of rims, but you might need it if you have a flat tire or you need these car repairs. So you use it for that, and then once you pay for whatever you do from your emergency fund, then you start building that back up again. $50 a check, $75 a check, $20 a check, whatever you can save, do it, and then you'll be able to prevent those problems from popping up. Because guess what? There will always be unexpected expenses.
Yeah. And what I did to help finally get out of that vicious cycle is I actually went to a totally different bank and I opened up just one account and I got a direct deposit form and I signed, basically direct deposit to come automatically out of my paycheck. I think it was $50 a paycheck that went into this other bank account at a completely different bank. And I didn't get a credit card or a debit card or anything. I didn't want any way by which that I could spend it. I had to kind of keep it away from myself. And that it automatically came out of my paycheck. So I kind of almost forgot about having that extra money. It just kind of went into this other account. And then gradually I'd increase the direct deposit from 50 to 100 or whatever I could afford. But that was something that I had to do because unfortunately, I was 20 something years old. Even though I was a non-commissioned officer in the United States Army, I didn't have the discipline and the wherewithal to manage it without putting some kind of constraints around myself like that.
Yeah, so Eddie, you did exactly what I was talking about with an emergency fund. You took that $50 a month a check, and later $100 a check, and then you put that into a separate account that you had available if there's an emergency, right? Mm-hmm. So you didn't have access to it. You didn't have it on your checking account or your debit card. So when you're out with the buddies and you go to a bar or you're out shopping, you're not going to go plunk that down and buy a stereo, or you're not going to buy a round for everybody because, hey, I got the card. You've got it there if, hey, I need a new alternator or my tire blew or, I got to get new shocks or struts on my car or whatever it is, that money's there. So you did exactly what I was explaining. You might not have known that's what it was called, but that's exactly what it's for. So anybody who's listening, follow Eddie's advice. It's the perfect course of action to do.
Yeah, that's cool. And you can do that even after you get out of the military. When you're working in the civilian sector, you can do those things and follow that advice as well. That's awesome. So, boy, time's flying. We're wrapping up here. We're already almost at our hour mark. So I know I could probably go on for hours and ask a lot more questions. This stuff is really interesting to me. I think it's interesting to the audience. Well, at least it should be, because I know, as well as I do, anybody that's serving in the military, you don't join the military to make a whole lot of money. So, you could be fiscally responsible and you can end up having more money in the bank than the next person. But the wages that they pay, you're not joining the military. You're not gonna be a rich person. But that aside, it's important to be at least self-aware and cognizant of your finances. And so I really like your insight and your feedback on some of the financial aspects of this. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on, is because you're far more intelligent when it comes to this than I am to speak to the group about it. I'd also like to talk a little bit more. Maybe next time I can have you on and we can get into more of the specifics about obtaining education while we're still in the military, because that's something that I did not take advantage of when I was in, and I really, really, really wish that I had. I finally, I've got my MBA now, but let me tell you, it was a hell of a lot harder, and it took a hell of a lot longer to do that post military than it would have if I had started. I had 10 years in the Army, and if I had done even an associate's degree worth of education while I was in, it would have probably shaved off 4 years of plucking away at an education on the outside. So that's for next time, I guess. I kind of alluded to it a little bit in a couple of my previous episodes, but that's something that we can definitely talk about. But I believe you might even have some podcast episodes on that very thing, don't you?
Yeah, I do actually. I recorded a podcast about taking classes while in the military, and then I had another guest on who talked about using the post 9/11 GI Bill. He actually, believe it or not, he used the post 9/11 GI Bill to get three master's degree programs, three master's degrees. He was an officer, so he already had his bachelor's, and then he found a school that had a 1 year master's degree program, 12 months, and he did three of those. So he was able
Wow.
to do that. And he said he just loved learning, he loved the schooling, and he also wanted to transition into a different career field. So that enabled him to take his previous experience and then get that master's degree and kind of leverage that and say, well, I've done X, Y, and Z, and now I've got this degree. So even though it's not directly related, even though my previous experience is directly related, I am a fit for you guys because of this. So he was able to do that. Great story. Obviously, many of us, we just want to get a bachelor's degree or a single master's degree, but there's a lot of things that you can do with this education, and I'd be happy to speak to your audience about what I've done, what I've seen other people do, and how you can be really strategic in using your benefits to help not only yourself, but possibly your family members, because the post 9/11 GI Bill can be transferred to family members as well. So that's something to keep in mind. That's only for people who are currently serving. It's a retention tool. But yeah, I'd love to speak again on any of these topics.
That's awesome. Thanks a lot. So, at the end of the show, I ask all my guests a question. It's the same question, and that is this. As you know, this show is called Change Your POV or Point of View. Give us an instance, Ryan, where you thought something one way, but something happened, an event or occurrence, something happened that forced you or caused you to think of that thing in a completely different way. What was it, and what did you learn from that experience?
Yeah, I've got a lot of those. Getting married, having children, joining the military, leaving the military. I will tell you that before I joined the military, it shocked my parents because I used to go with my brother to the Marine Corps recruiter's office all the time, and he would go there because he was going to join, and I just went there because we rode our bikes up to the mall, and that's where it was. So I'd go hang with him for a while, and I kept telling everybody the military is not for me. I'm never going to join the military. And then I started looking at it, and I was like, this kind of sounds pretty good. So obviously, once you join and you get to learn what the military is all about, then yeah, I mean that changes everything. If I'm looking for one seminal moment where everything changed, I don't know if I have it. I try to keep an open mind in a lot of things, and gosh, joining the guard. You used to, when you're on active duty, you don't understand exactly what the guard or the reserves are all about. And then when I started learning more and I spoke to people, I was like, gosh, man, that totally changed my point of view. And a good friend of mine, Doug Nordman, he is the founder of themilitaryguide.com, and he wrote a book called The Military Guide to Financial Independence and Retirement, I think is what it's called. So I read his book, and it was very eye-opening, and that completely changed my point of view on serving in the Guard. And there's a neighbor of mine who's in the Guard. So, I guess I don't have a single moment. My answer to that, though, is just to keep an open mind about a lot of things, because there's always going to be a point in your life where you are going to change your point of view, whether it's from something major happening or just a series of small events that kind of add up, and you get curious and you go look at something and say, you know what, maybe I sold myself short or sold this idea short. So yeah, just keep an open mind and kind of be willing to be willing to change your early opinions, because none of us are experts. We're always learning. We're always trying to figure things out. And I guarantee if you do that long enough, you're going to realize that we all are open to changing our minds.
Yeah.
And we're all going to learn from that.
Where can people find you? What are your where can they connect with you, find you, learn more about what you got going on?
Yeah, the best place is going to be themilitarywallet.com. There's a contact page on there if you need to get a hold of me. I am on Twitter, but I'm rarely on Twitter. I have Twitter accounts, but I'll be honest with you. My email is the best. It's ryan@militarywallet.com, themilitarywallet.com, and themilitarywallet.com website. There's a contact page. If you need to get a hold of me, those are the best places because it goes to my email box. I'm on Facebook, but I stay active with my friends, but I don't really get public on a whole lot of different places. It's just kind of for personal type stuff. So yeah, that'd be the best.
You can find all the show notes for this episode at changeyourpov.com/episode 54. Never miss an episode. Hit subscribe on your podcast player of choice. We have a lot more great content headed your way. If you want to reach me directly, you can email me at eddie@changeyourpov.com. I would love to hear from you. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Change Your POV podcast with Eddie Lazary. Check out more content by going to changeyourpov.com. And remember, your ability and willingness to change your point of view will open doors of opportunity.